A very good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all the viewers who have joined us from across the world. I'm Dr. Ananya Avasti, speaking on behalf of the Harvard School of Public Health India Research Center. Welcome to the next webinar under the webinar series COVID-19 Outbreak on the Front Lines, co-hosted by the Harvard Tia Chan School of Public Health India Research Center, Project Sanchar, and Bombay Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Through this series, we aim to convene leading academic experts, public health practitioners, and representatives from the private sector to share their insights on the spread and control of coronavirus, its impact on health and well-being of communities, and India's policy and health system response to mitigate the crisis. The topic for today's webinar is COVID-19 and public health, reimagining the role of public and private sector partnerships. Now, providing you a brief introduction of the co-hosts, the Harvard Chan India Research Center is the first global center of the Harvard Tia Chan School of Public Health. Established in the year 2015 with the generous support of Mr. Ajay Piramal and Dr. Swati Piramal, who also happens to be an alumna of the school, the center has three strategic goals of research, teaching, and translation of evidence into policies and programs, where the center provides a platform to facilitate faculty exchange and partnership between public health researchers in India and faculty from the School of Public Health. The center is led by Professor K. Viswanath, Lee Kum Kee Professor of Health Communication at the Harvard Tia Chan School of Public Health. Our second host is Project Sanchar, which is an acronym for Science and News, Communicating Health and Research. Project Sanchar is aimed at building the capacity of journalists to draw on the latest science and data for shaping public knowledge, attitudes, and its policy on health. And our third co-host is the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is one of the oldest chambers in India and serves as an effective vehicle of communication between the regulatory bodies, the corporate sector, and the society. Coming to the distinguished speakers, we are honored to have with us Professor K. Viswanath, Lee Kum Kee Professor of Health Communication at the Harvard Tia Chan School of Public Health, Mr. Suresh Kakani, Additional Commissioner of the Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation, Dr. Swati Piramal, Vice Chairperson Piramal Group, Dr. Abhay Bang, Director of Society for Education, Action and Research in Community Health, SEARCH, and Dr. Shashank Joshi, Dean for the Indian College of Physicians and member of the Maharashtra COVID-19 Task Force. The session will be moderated by Mr. Ranjit Shahani, who's been the former MD and Vice Chairman at Novartis India Limited and also serves on the Advisory Council of the Harvard Chan India Research Center. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Anjali Bansal, founder Avana Capital and Senior Vice President, Bombay Chambers of Commerce and Industry, to please give us the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ananya. Good evening, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, our board, our members, and our wonderful executive team. Let me start with a very short background on Bombay Chamber. The Chamber, as we call it, has been playing a proactive role in the development of India for the last 184 years. Of our several thousand members, we cover a wide spectrum across large corporates and SMEs. And more than a dozen of our large corporate members actually have been members for more than 100 years in the Chamber. In addition to our rich history, main area of operations include research in key industry areas and advocacy with the government regulatory bodies. We work through subcommittees in all of these specific industry areas. We have very eminent members in our subcommittees who regularly interface with membership as well as with government and interpret new notifications, laws, as well as provide input for the formulation of said notifications and laws. Turning to the topic for today, the COVID crisis has highlighted the importance of the public healthcare system. An effective public health system requires the collaborative efforts of a complex network of people and organizations in the public and private sectors, as well as an alignment of policy and practice at the national, state, and local levels. I'm confident that today's discussion with this absolutely eminent panel of experts will certainly contribute towards reimagining the role of public-private partnerships in Indian public health systems. I know I am greatly looking forward to hearing all their views. I'm sure you are too. So I will hand over to my chamber colleague and session moderator, Mr. Ranjit Shahani, with a final suggestion to keep this interactive and get the best out of this panel of experts today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anjali. I am actually delighted to be here with this very distinguished panelists, and a warm welcome to each one of you who have joined for this evening. It should be a very interesting evening. You know, COVID is by far the biggest pandemic that the world has seen. The scale and depth of this challenge is still unraveling. It is actually a threefold challenge. Firstly, it is a healthcare challenge, no doubt. Secondly, it's an economic crisis. And thirdly, and most importantly, it's a humanitarian tragedy. And that is surely a dangerous cocktail of shocks. It is a crisis in every country, and the same policy tools of the past cannot work as the unimaginable happened. These are uncharted waters, but our spirit is high for a fight. The destruction, disruption, and dread unleashed by the unprecedented COVID-19 across the world now seems to end soon with the approval of several vaccine candidates. While this is welcoming news that the world has been yearning for, the challenge of producing, distributing, and administering the vaccines to the population in the shortest possible time is formidable. More so for our country, given our population, given our geographical spread, and given our skewed health infrastructure across not only urban and rural areas, but also between states. So today's topic, COVID-19 and public health, reimagining the role of public-private partnerships, is most appropriate for us to do this. And we have today this very eminent panel. I will actually be going by rotation across the panel, asking questions, and later we will have participation from the audience with some questions. So may I begin straight away with the man right at the center, Mr. Suresh Kakani. As Additional Municipal Commissioner of MCGM, you have been at the forefront of leading Mumbai's response to COVID-19 pandemic. This is a gigantic project. Could you please tell us about how the BMC would like to leverage public-private partnerships to effectively respond to COVID-19? Mr. Kakani. You're on mute, Mr. Kakani.
Thank you very much, sir, for a generous introduction. Now coming back to the pandemic situation in Mumbai, as all of you know that Mumbai is a very densely populated city, and there are multiple challenges to control the pandemic situation. We used a multi-pronged strategy and involve all the stakeholders for checking out a systematic plan for handling the pandemic situation in Mumbai. MCGM, the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, or BMC, a popular word, it has got a very strong primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare system. If you ask me about the numbers, we have close to 180 dispensaries, more than 200 health posts for extension activities, 28 maternity homes, 16 peripheral hospitals, 5 specialized hospitals, and 5 medical colleges. And through all this infrastructure, we deliver the health facility or healthcare to the citizens of Mumbai and the area around Mumbai, not only MMR region, but the entire country, you can say. But I mean, this is being a gigantic the task. Instead of relying 100% on the MCGM or BMC's workforce, we partnered with the private sector in a more skillful and more meaningful manner. To start with, I mean, setting up quarantine facilities, if you start from the beginning, we targeted that, yes, we should have adequate quarantine facilities available with us so that the high-risk contacts, close contacts of the COVID positive patient should be quarantined from the community, from the their urban and near urban. And these facilities subsequently we use for housing the medical staff working in the COVID hospitals. So, I mean, this is number one. Number two, initially we had only one laboratory for COVID testing. Subsequently, we could convince the government authority, Government of India, that we should allow the private lab owners, lab operators to start the testing facility. And now we have adequate testing facility in Mumbai. While doing so, we also have capped the upper price, upper limit of the charges, so that even if someone is going to a private lab, he should not require to pay more or below the amount. But so far as the MCGM facilities are concerned, I mean, it was free of cost for everyone, either a walk-in patient or the whose service comes in our hospital. The third thing we targeted about the involving the local private practitioners, because in the slum area, in the densely populated area, the majority of crowd rely heavily on the private practitioners. So, I mean, a slum like Dharavi or Nehru Nagar or Govandi or any of the bigger slums for that matter, we take them on board by providing the PPE kits free of cost, because getting PPE kit by a small practitioner, I mean, was very difficult. So we provided free of cost PPE kit, which will last for 1 week. On weekly, we replenish that stock. So involving them really helped us in slums and densely populated area. Next thing we targeted that, yes, I mean, though we have a very strong network, we have very strong infrastructural facilities available with us, we involved the private hospitals as well. Initially, it was a voluntary, but subsequently we switch our gear and use the regulatory mode, so that the number of beds which may be required for isolating or the better treatment to the COVID positive patients. And the regulatory approach, when I say regulatory approach, we again use two strategies. Reserve some of the beds for 80% of the beds, to say about the exact number, 80% of the beds in a COVID private hospital to be allotted by the municipal corporation or the ward warden of the municipal corporation, 20% left with the hospital operator. Similarly, we also kept the upper price of the charges, various treatment. If someone is housing or occupying a normal bed, some charge oxygenated bed, higher charges in ICU bed, more than that. So in this manner, I mean, we could involve the private sector, and they also happily joined us. And now we have the adequate beds available to house any number of patients. In the meanwhile, I mean, because the public hospitals were much in demand, so we developed the jumbo facilities in all areas of Mumbai Corporation, and that too with the active participation of the private sector. And the ICU facilities in these jumbo facilities, I mean, the normal beds and the oxygen bed we used to operate, with the ICU bed that require more manpower, better care. So we involved the private sector by following a certain procedure and for treating the patient, for taking care of the patients. The private experts, like, I mean, we have formed a task force. Like Dr. Shashank Joshi sir, I mean, he is heading one of the task force, and for advising and for leading our fight against the COVID-19. And the private expert were also linked with the various jumbo facilities. The jumbo facilities are the makeshift facilities. These are not the permanent hospital per se. So in these hospitals, so that the telemedicine or teleconsultation we facilitated, and that also helped us a lot in taking care of the COVID patient. The bed management, because the managing the bed in the city like Mumbai was a gigantic work. We developed a dashboard, and that dashboard, everyone, including the private hospital, were asked to update this dashboard on hourly basis, so that if the bed gets vacant, it can be allocated either by centrally or from the ward room. We have a 24 ward room available with us, and those are equipped with all type of facilities like ambulance, then doctors, all type of facilities are there. And in case of need, they can ship the patient from his house to a nearby private facility or the government facility or the public facility. Similarly, we also make use of the artificial intelligence or IT for treating because X-ray and CT scan was the very popular during this era. So we use the NGOs task force for deploying the X-ray facility in the various slum or densely populated area, and a radiologist sitting somewhere in his cabin or in his hospital can read the X-ray and can detect, yes, he is a suspected COVID positive patient, so he should be isolated and he should be quarantined. In this fashion, we also involve many NGOs under the CSR. CSR, I mean, the CSR also played a major role. Like Dr. Piramal, I mean, who is also one of the panelists, I mean, Dr. Piramal and other big houses, I mean, extended the helping hand to municipal corporation and to the various communities for extending our support to the needy patient. And because of this, I mean, we could control the pandemic situation. The situation under control now, every day we are getting around 300 or 400 cases. Our fatality rate, which was around 6%, now it is less than 2%. And because of all these interventions and because of the active support of the private sector, we could, I mean, achieve this in a minimum possible time. And of course, the every stakeholder worked very hard. Our team worked very hard, though we are on the management side, but the entire task, entire machinery worked day and night for this battle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kakani. That was an amazingly enterprise integrated approach you've taken across multiple dimensions. And that is why we can see how the outcome and effectiveness has already begun to show. And for a city like Mumbai, with over 23 million people, it's not an easy job at all. Switching to another side, which is on philanthropy, I would like to go to Dr. Piramal. And the question is, in a moment of global crisis, philanthropies were amongst the first to launch impact funds. The offices were closed, the buildings were shut, and the entire staff were telecommuting in order to serve our collective public interests, health interests, and play their role in containing the virus. But in 2021, how should philanthropists redirect their funds to respond to the COVID-19 challenge? And what role should they play in keeping our communities safe? Swati.
Yeah, thank you, Ranjit. India was supposed to be a disaster, which didn't happen. And I think the credit to that does go to public-private partnerships. As Mr. Kitani mentioned, it is the role together that everybody stood together. When we had the migrant workers, the philanthropists of Mumbai city, from the Tatas to Reliance to all groups joined together, and they gave meals and they made sure that nobody went hungry. And there wasn't any starvation death because we could manage to get all these to the most difficult areas where we couldn't reach, the kids went. So I think that was one example. Then looking at those who are most vulnerable were the senior citizens, and they really didn't know what hit them. They were in fact dying at higher rates than the normal population because they were more vulnerable. And there, I think the role of telecommunication and again, public-private partnerships made a big impact. For example, the Niti Aayog with 100 of the poorest districts of India did the Surakshit Nana Nani Dadi Dada Abhiyan. And that reached out to 12 million people. 75,000 people got their medicines, they got things which they needed. And they really were so touched that somebody called them, all completely voluntary, by young people, that it was a place where the young helped the elderly. And that was really a moment of joy where they were so touched, where somebody cared to phone them. So I think the role of philanthropy or public-private partnerships has never been more critical. This is a public health moment which we cannot waste. And it is the first time that frontline people have got the respect that they deserve. Doctors, nurses, people really looking at patients. We can't waste this moment. So we'll use it for the future because pandemics are going to happen again. And we must be prepared next time to be really efficient and really use everything in our armament to help deal with not just COVID-19, but any pandemic of the future.
No, you're absolutely right. Given the scale of the challenge, more is less over here. The more we give the philanthropies and our time and the expertise, we don't know what is going to happen in the future. But the fact that everybody's got together is itself a big first step. We now move, we are all in Mumbai. We live in many ways a slightly cocoon environment, but there are parts of India which many of us have not even been to. And I would like to come to Dr. Abhay Bhang. You have been actively working in the district of Gadchiroli in Maharashtra. Has Surge tested any model of public-private partnerships in Gadchiroli? And what have been the barriers faced by your organization in collaborating across sectors? Dr. Bhang.
Thank you, Mr. Shahani. And I would like to begin by suggesting a little widening of the scope of this public-private partnership phrase. When we say public, ironically, we mean government. Public sector means government sector. Where are the people in this? And so we can call really public-private people partnership. Surge, my organization in Gadchiroli, from the very beginning has been working on this fourth pillar, the people. As you described, Gadchiroli is a very backward district, predominantly rural and tribal district. Healthcare is lacking. And we have developed over the years a model of involving communities and people in providing healthcare. So every year, we used to organize People's Health Assembly. Why should we, the medical expert, decide what people need and what people should be given? We ask people the priorities in People's Health Assembly. What are your health problem priorities? And 30 years ago, they gave us priorities: malaria, diarrhea, child death, and alcoholism. These were their priorities. And to solve those problems, we developed this model that the policies and priorities decided by People's Health Assembly then were implemented in the village through community health workers. One woman, one man in every village, trained by Surge, who provided care in the village, and then finally the families. Now this three-pillar model, supported by my organization Surge by way of training, technical inputs, supervision, finance, we have successfully reduced over the decades pneumonia mortality in rural tribal area, newborn mortality. So the child mortality dramatically reduced from 121 to now 25. Malaria control. So this model works very well. We call this the Arogya Swaraj model, in which the communities, families, individuals become empowered to take care of their own health. When Corona epidemic arrived, you can imagine, for the people of Gadchiroli, virus which they had never heard, never seen. So for them, it was something like a supernatural force or some ghost which was prowling around their village, and media had told them that you may suddenly die, that ghost may enter your village and you may die. So the first reaction was reaction of panic. They didn't even allow the incoming labor from their own villages, sons and daughters of their own families, to come in when they were coming from somewhere else. Everybody was terribly afraid. So in 108 villages, we launched a campaign, Communities Against Corona. So in every village, we took elder people, village leaders, and constituted a committee against Corona, who made social policies against crowding, for social distancing, etc. 10 youth volunteer in each village, 5 girls, 5 boys, who enforced some of these policies, like social distancing, using masks, who went from house to identify sick persons. We trained our community health worker to give health education to families against Corona. They visited 20 families every day to educate using a 10-minute video clip that we made. So they showed it on the smartphone and identify sick, those who had corona-like or flu-like symptom. Use pulse oximetry to identify those with low oxygen. They were referred. We also established teleconsultation facilities so they could consult our doctors in the hospital. And finally, because we did not have extensive lab support for diagnosis, we decided to use survey and surveillance as a method. And so 70 in this population of 1 lakh, every day, randomly 70 families were visited and asked for the presence of flu-like symptom and breathlessness. And we decided that if there is a sudden increase in the prevalence of these symptoms, we would consider that the incidence of corona in this community has increased. Now, this surveillance system identified sick people, gave us the prevalence, constantly gave us people's behavior pattern, use of masks, social distancing, hand washing. And for nearly 4 months, this model really worked very well. Later on, of course, as everywhere else happened, gradually some laxity set in. But fortunately, as Swati Piramal said in the beginning, we were lucky in India that the epidemic didn't affect us very heavily. We had relatively light touch. So either because of those efforts by the community or because of whatever happened in India, but the epidemic seemed to be receding. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bang. You know, this is really more than a case study book for management schools, the way you have managed the COVID challenge in village. When we all growing up, you know, in management, we learned the 4 Ps, which is product, place, price, promotion. But your 4 Ps, public, private, people, partnership, that really touches the heart. Thank you so much for sharing your work that you're doing, the perspectives and how you manage this in such an isolated area. So Dr. Joshi, you know, you're right at the center of it as well. As a member of the COVID-19 task force in Maharashtra, could you elaborate on the role played by the task force in prevention and treatment of COVID-19? Has the task force been involved in the process of supervising or training healthcare workers, guiding vaccine cold storage and vaccine rollout? Dr. Joshi.
Thank you, Ranjit, for having me here. And our task force was primarily constituted by our Honorable CM with a mandate to reduce mortality. What happened is that nobody knew what hit us in end March. And we were looking at a virus which was predictably unpredictable, which was probably 3.5 to 4 months old. And he set up a group of people who were experts with domain knowledge from US and diverse experiences in different roles. Like I'm an endocrinologist, but I have a lot of experience in public health in the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which I worked very closely before migrating into full-fledged endocrinology. So many of us were pulled on, and our first motto was to identify and treat appropriately moderate to severe COVID and save lives. So we actually came out with the Indian COVID risk score, and in Mumbai was the ground zero. So because it was the ground zero, we didn't know what was happening. In fact, most of us, what we saw in March, April, and May became the national policy. And we knew how to triage out who is going to be at risk and who is not going to be at risk. And whatever we looked at, we were responsible for setting out protocols for treatment, particularly for moderate, severe, and critically ill COVID. That was primarily our mandate. We also looked at the home isolation treatment policies and protocols. And what we learned were very insightful learnings. We realized that 80% of COVID infected individuals are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. There is a nose COVID, throat COVID, lung COVID, which doesn't need oxygen. So actually the key test was the 6-minute walk test with pulse oximetry. And if somebody doesn't desaturate, you're good. And if you identify a vulnerable group, which Swati was alluding to, the senior citizens, people with comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, they were at risk. So they were the ones who had to be targeted. So our job was to get into people like the BMC with Mr. Kakani's team and Mr. Chahal, initially Mr. Pardeshi. We had to really focus and tell them that these are the high-risk cohorts. They had to be got early to the hospital across the state, because that was a state issue. Because we had a case fatality rate touching sometimes 10% and 11% and 12%. And our mandate was to get it below 1%. And it's now there. We are there now. It took us a long time to do that. And the second thing is look at small, simple things. We realized that, there was so much of hype about chloroquine and new drugs like doxycycline, ivermectin, and all this. Whatever came in COVID, predictably, unpredictably went out. The only things which survived were that it was oxygen, prone position, maybe a little bit of steroids of people who didn't respond. Most of the antivirals had to be used very early in the disease, and they at best help recovery but don't save lives. Most of the modern age agents like the monoclonals were useful in a very small subset of the community. So we were able to not only devise protocols, take training programs across the state for different stakeholders, and identify weak spots. We found out most people with COVID were dying between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning. And that was the time they used to get up and they used to go to a restroom and they used to remove their oxygen and they used to desaturate. So simple things like getting a bed commode, a urinal pot next to their bed actually saved a lot of lives. And it was nursing care, supportive care, oxygen, prone position, which actually saved lives. And that is why I think it was the whole team which was dedicated. So of course, there was a lot of training involved. Our protocols are live protocols. They still change. Every week the task force meets. We interacted closely, not only with the chief minister and all the stakeholders, including the collectors, including the various other stakeholders. And we were clearly responsible for setting out some treatment guidelines, which kept on evolving. And we were often at changes and warheads even with the national guidelines. For example, National Task Force had a guideline A, and many of us were even called and lectured them in somewhere in mid-May and told them what we did as the Mumbai experience. And the Mumbai experience was very clear. What we did in Dharavi was, as Mr. Kakani said, we went there with the X-rays and the pulse oximeters in the community, picked up the senior citizens. If they were desaturating, pulled them out. So we sometimes have to go to the community to save lives. And I think that ultimately worked. And of course, things got better. But I think eventually we realized what Dr. Bang was saying, that it's people's responsibility. And I think we took out public health experts from across the country and across the globe. And I virtually reached out to every stakeholder who could matter. And had a colleague of mine who was in UP, who was actually loaned out by a global foundation. And he told us that it is the people who matter. And that's how my family, my responsibility scheme came out. And I think we had to ultimately empower people, because people are rebellious. They didn't want to mask. They still don't want to mask. They have their own mindset. They have their own domain extraction of communication and making an opinion. I don't think experts like us really matter to them. They make their own opinions from hearsay, WhatsApp University, Google University, what have you. So we had to make them responsible. Your family, your responsibility. And that allowed us to set up a database, which is now very useful for a vaccination. For example, the first cohort is the healthcare workers and the frontline workers. The second cohort is the senior citizens above 50 and those below 50 with comorbidities. We got a full database now. We have a full database of hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, people above 50, people below 50. And that database is ready. And that's the vaccine database. The 27 crore Indians, the Maharashtra database is already ready with us, almost completed to be uploaded for vaccinations. In the vaccination rollout, I think everything has come predominantly from the center. And I think our role has been more of operational guidelines and it has been riddled with a lot of digital issues. But I think now the learning curve is over. I think there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy. And I think, that's why I had to go on record that, I could take any vaccine. I have taken the vaccine. A little bit of side effects will occur, but you have to vaccinate yourself. But I personally feel a lot of people in Mumbai got a lot of asymptomatic disease, particularly in the slums. And that has led to a critical mass of exposure. And Mumbai is just not slums. It's also got those high rises, which are as good as slums because they have poorly ventilated spaces. They are still crowded. They still are a perfect milieu for a COVID environment. And it's important that, we plant more trees, we look after our environment, we decongest our city. We need to take care of this. And I think BMC came out reasonably well. But I think people also cooperated. I think without people's cooperation, I think we would have lost the battle. And some amount of danda was needed. So you saw some strict policies in religious times, like Ganpati times, like Diwali times, like Christmas times. And I must thank all the communities and religious sentiments did not take a ugly turn at all. In fact, I think we behaved in a very civil way. We are seeing what's happening in the rest of the country. I don't want to comment that because we are apolitical people. But I think, Mumbaikars and Maharashtra in general behaved in a very responsible way. We could still have done better. We have a lot of learnings from this. And we are still optimistic but cautious. I still would like to warn a word of caution. We should not go the way Europe went. And Dr. Bang said that we are lucky because probably we have some amount of a good immune quotient because of a poor hygiene quotient, which is not necessarily matching. And we have a lot, as a researcher for me, it's a very good learning experience. I'm still compiling my data to publish, but it's a very unique opportunity for us to look. One of the reasons India did well is because we have a very small geriatric population. We have only 6 to 8% of our population which is geriatric. Unlike the US and Europe, which has a very large geriatric population. In fact, our population is predominantly the young. And it is the young and the children and the women are protected comparatively for COVID and Corona. And that's a large Indian populace. And which is why we had the best recovery rates. We have done reasonably well. The vulnerable groups still had high mortality. But I think our contribution predominantly was having different domain experts. We had critical care experts, pulmonary medicine experts, infectious disease experts, and all of us put our minds together to make protocols which were cost effective, which were easy to introduce, and timing was the key. When the patient came, and the timing was the key, and ensuring that they come on time and they get treated aggressively. And I think there was a time, and I must compliment Mr. Kakani, there was a time when public hospitals had all the medicines in stock and private hospitals were struggling. Of course, it was a perfect symbiosis for public and private partnership. But I still remember there were situations when there was remdesivir and tocilizumab in all the BMC hospitals, and they had to actually ration it out to private hospitals like a Breach Candy or Lilavati, which is a very unique paradox and which would have never occurred in the good old days. But I think the private public sector did work together, hands in hands. We had no barriers, and I think digital, interface allowed us to interact more often. I think, in a connected world, an ecosystem was created where I could connect with my friends in the US, whether it was the Mayo Clinic, which I come from, or whether it was from Mount Sinai, where I had worked in the past, or even, we had some friends in Mass General. People helped out from United Kingdom. I had friends in Japan. I had friends even in China and Korea. And I think we were able to talk. And, we started, in fact, Bangladesh doctors, I'm on the IDF Regional Council. So Bangladesh, one of the reasons. One of our doctors used doxycycline ivermectin. He used it. By the time his trial was done, we were already using it in India. So, we have done a lot of research mode activities. And I think, but I think that our recovery rates were good. Our fatalities have started coming down. We still should not be off guard, but I think it was a good learning experience. And we were involved in training. We realized the failures in our public health infrastructure and also in our private infrastructure. So it's not just that it was an eye-opener only to criticize a public hospital. Both public and private hospitals suddenly realized their lacunae. And I think we have a long, long way to go in rebuilding the public health infrastructure of this country, of this city, of India, because we are spending very small percentage of our GDP in health. And I think I'm happy that health will be back in focus. We are not spending our 4% of GDP at all. We are spending maybe 0.8 or 0.9%. I don't think this budget will make any change in it. But I wish and pray that there's some more, doubling of budget so that we can build some good infrastructure for a future pandemic, which Swati was alluding to. We are going to live with pandemics. But I think it was overall a very insightful experience, and we are still in the journey. I still feel we are just past the half time, but I think we are still in the journey.
No, I think that's a very comprehensive answer. In fact, you really talked all of the multidimensional things you've done and how steep the learning curve was. But again, you reinforced the P part, which Dr. Bang also mentioned about people, and that made the big difference. And we will continue to take support of people because wearing masks, social distancing, hygiene will remain important over the next year or two in spite of vaccines. So coming to Professor Vishwanath, globally, you have conducted a major research project with the CEOs in the United States on how business can promote culture of health. What are some of the lessons learned and how can they be applied to India? Vish.
Thank you, Ranjit. And also, namaste. Let me first thank everyone on the panel on behalf of the school. And thank you and Swati for prodding and pushing us to continue to use this public education platform to talk about these issues, and my team and Bombay Chamber of Commerce for organizing this. I think this has been said earlier too. This notion of what we have learned in our interviews with C-suite leaders in the US is that those companies and C-suite leaders who have moved away from the CSR framework to what we are calling as a culture of health framework have been very successful and have been very progressive in many ways. What we mean by that is, traditionally companies used to think about and focus on avoiding injuries, right? Occupational health, promoting presenteeism and reducing absenteeism in their companies. But I think over a period of time, certain companies have moved from that approach to promoting what people have called as wellness programs. So promoting screening, promoting healthy behaviors, healthy nutrition, or physical activity, etc. But I think what is relevant for today, especially given what the fellow panelists have been saying earlier on, is a group of C-suite leaders who have actually focusing on well-being, in the true sense of the word, using the assets of their companies rather than taking the deficit approach, right? If you go back and think about the World Health Organization's definition of what health is not just merely absence of disease, right? But it is a complete state of physical, psychological, and social well-being. And the question then is, how do we promote that well-being, going beyond illness, going beyond wellness, to actually promoting well-being and taking that very integrated, holistic look at an individual rather than focusing on avoiding a disease, I think. And so that's one of the principal lessons that is very relevant here, given that these companies are very well set for that. And the other thing is about, you started talking about the philanthropy. I think, to me, I think a company's operations, we learned from our interviews, go beyond philanthropy, even in the routine activities, right? But the routine activities of the company actually have an impact on health in a number of ways. And I think that has to be recognized. One of the examples I will give you is the most progressive C-suite leaders who focus on this broader well-being, focus attention on the time poverty of their employees, and the notion of well-being, right? So for example, they actually allow employees to do volunteer work on company's time, right? So, and align the skills of their employees with the needs of the community. So for example, you have a lot of talented group of people who are in IT or in finance or in other technical skills. They can go out and use their skills to help members of the community, right? So that kind of an alignment where you're actually teaching financial literacy in a community because you have the financial expertise, that kind of alignment actually promotes not only the well-being of the community, but actually the sense of purpose in the employees. So that's why my argument is it's beyond philanthropy and beyond corporate social responsibility to actually whatever the companies are doing has an impact, and the companies can promote this approach. So in the context of COVID-19, I think, this becomes extremely relevant if you think about it, because the companies have the expertise, right? The logistics and supply chain, the marketing. People are talking about on the panel about engaging and investing in people. I think companies have that expertise. Companies have the spread, employees of the companies are also members of the community. So I think this taking that broader vision, broader scope of what one can do and how one can tap into the expertise that lies within the company to work with the community makes a huge difference. And that's what we learned. I think, those C-suite leaders who looked at it not just as a focus on wellness or avoiding illness or occupational injuries, but on the overall well-being of their employees and also the members of the community, and looking at alignment between them, have been very successful in promoting this. I think, and as has been said here, it looks like the efforts that have been successful, whether it's in Gadchiroli or in Mumbai or in other places, exactly, symbolizes that, where people are actually aligning that expertise, aligning those needs together, to push and advance this idea, not as a separate philanthropy out there, but it's a part of what we do as a corporate sector. So that's the lesson we learned in our interviews with C-suite leaders.
Thank you, Vish, for sharing those perspectives about what you learned globally. I have another 15 minutes left for this segment. So I'll go through one more round with the panelists, and we'll get back to Mr. Kakani. And the question is that the government of India has approved a couple of COVID vaccines for emergency use. So how is the BMC deciding on distribution priorities, addressing vaccine-related funding challenges, and undertaking outcome measurements of the COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I mean, we have got two vaccines for the city of Mumbai. Covaxin, which is being produced by Bharat Biotech, and the Covishield of the Serum Institute. So for the MCGM is concerned, we are, prioritize the healthcare workers. For that, the CoWIN app has been developed by Government of India, and we have uploaded the data of all the healthcare workers on that app, and that process is on. Until date, we could vaccinate 25,000 plus healthcare workers. Once the total amount, total numbers are 1.33 lakh as on date, it may go up because the people are also joining the queue, and it may go up to 1.5 lakh. But we have adequate vaccines for both the doses. After 28 days of the first dose, the second dose will be given to the person, so that the adequate benefit can be reached in the course of time. The second in the priority list is frontline workers like police department, security forces, or the municipal employees. All these are working in the backend in the support system. So those are in the second in queue. And we have uploaded the data on CoWIN app. And as and when we get the vaccine from Government of India, we'll start vaccinating the frontline workers as well. So far the cost is concerned, as of now, we are not charging anything. Everything is free. The vaccine is also free, and the support system, like we need to set up, as on date, we have more than 12 centers having 80 plus units for vaccination. And all the support system, the cost is being borne by the MCGM. The third category, as indicated to us by Government of India, is the person having age 50 years or more, and the persons having comorbidities, other illnesses. That, the data collection is yet to begin, but we have, as indicated by Dr. Shashank Joshi, we have launched a campaign, My Family, My Responsibility. And under that campaign, we have collected the data of entire citizen of Mumbai. And we have the data of the comorbid persons, the data having the persons having age more than 50 years. So that data can be made use of for uploading on the CoWIN app, or otherwise the other mode, anyone who's interested to enroll himself for vaccination, so he can enroll on that by downloading the app. So far as the surveillance is concerned, there is no formal surveillance system in place as of now, but we are contacting each and every person who got vaccination done through our ward war rooms. We have 24 ward war rooms working around the clock, 24/7. Plus the second, we advise the person to approach nearby public facility or the private facility in case of any reaction or in case of any adverse impact of Covaxin, the vaccine. The third one is we also have shared our numbers of the hospital to that person in a pamphlet that yes, he can feel free to contact the hospital in case of any adverse impact. So we are awaiting for the formal measurement, because it may happen after 45 days of the day one, because that much time period is required for developing the antibodies. That is what we are given to understand, and in the due course of time, definitely that system would be in place. But we have planned, we have done the macro planning of the entire vaccination, right from the storage, right from the transportation or the vaccination center. We can scale up our capacity, vaccination capacity, to 50,000 in the public hospital itself. We also have started collecting data from the private hospitals. Whosoever is interested and whosoever has got the adequate facilities, like infrastructure facility or the manpower, the data we are collecting it, and in due course of time, the private sector will also be involved in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. This is really very comprehensive, and I think India has actually shown the way. For example, our national election process, within 48 hours, we announce the results. So the system works. And in the US, the most developed country, in elections are over, but in Florida, I think they're still counting the votes. I mean, it is amazing how well we can manage some of these complex things. Swati, coming to you, with this physical distancing norms in place, in your opinion, where is telehealth headed in 2021? What are the benefits and limitations of telehealth? And how can the government and private companies support the emergence of telehealth to battle the growing patient backlog? Swati, over to you.
I'm glad you asked, because if you think about it, the telecommunication network of India did not go down for a single day, during this whole, whole year, I would say. Just to give you one example, in 8 states, Assam, Bihar, Jharkhand, Sikkim, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, Himachal Pradesh, where our own foundation is working, 104 health helpline, we reached 8.38 crores of people, just giving them health information, just telling them what they need, just telling them not to panic, just giving them everything that they ask. So I think it is done really well. And those remote states which did not have the infrastructure facilities that we have in Mumbai, Himachal Pradesh used telemedicine extremely effectively. Assam used screening with, we rapidly integrated the 104 and did health screening for people who came from out of Assam to Assam. And so I think the telecom network was one thing which did not let us down. The second thing, if you think about it, was oxygen. Dr. Shashank mentioned oxygen was the important thing. Not one place was there shortage of oxygen. And in fact, those states now are building reserve oxygen facilities for the next pandemic. For example, Uttar Pradesh, which didn't have its own oxygen facility. And my next door neighbor supplied 70% of India's oxygen needs. So the pharmaceutical industry and its allied healthcare industry did not let down this nation. And I think that medicines were available everywhere. They were manufactured quickly. Pharmaceutical was treated as an essential service. There was no lack of clean drinking water everywhere. It is treated as an essential service. And sometimes I laugh and smile at my classmates in the US, where they have very basic medicines. We have access to everything from remdesivir to all the latest medicines we have on the tap. And I think that is because India's pharmaceutical industry kicked in manufacturing. So while our front lines not recognize their effort, they had the tools also on hand all the time. And so oxygen, our pharmaceutical industry, our telecommunication industry, all those really kicked in to help in the pandemic.
But it's also true the pandemic has created some irreversible behaviors of online, whether it's online marketing. I mean, people, we know the digital natives are doing it all the while, but digital immigrants, people in their 60s and 70s are also doing everything online. But it'll be interesting how long this behavior continues even after the pandemic is over. But you're absolutely right. Some of these infrastructures just remain in place, which is truly, truly outstanding. Dr. Bhang, coming to you, the question is, has COVID-19 made necessary changes in India's health infrastructure, partnerships, data capabilities? And again, with the existing infrastructure and facilities, can the government and corporate sector do differently to respond better in times of pandemic, in your experience?
I'll try to answer your question with some different emphasis,
Sure.
which I know better than some of the technical or administrative aspect. My feeling is that so far the strategy against COVID-19 in India has been a war strategy. centralized decision making by a small group of people in Delhi, orders given, implemented through bureaucracy, police, enforced on the population. People's role was primarily obey and tali and thali bajao. Even the medical and health establishment was treated in this way. Private hospitals were occupied. Doctors were ordered by the collectors and bureaucrats. I hear stories from my colleague doctors in cities, how they were humiliated by the bureaucracy. I am told, I don't have first-hand knowledge, but that even CSR funds, instead of CSR Foundation implementing their own program, but were asked to contribute to the centralized fund. Now, all this, maybe this was necessary in a situation of panic and emergency. There was a national emergency. Nobody really knew disease. Nobody understood the epidemiology of disease. And the tragedy was happening in the West. So very naturally, response in this country was also in panic mode. But now we know that we have to learn to live with corona. The virus is going to stay in the nature. Maybe more virulent strain would come. Maybe with the evolution, less virulent strain would mutate, whatever it is, but corona is going to stay. It's not going to get eradicated like a smallpox virus. So in that case, if we have to learn to live with corona, now the war strategy will not do, because now we have a Cold War. And we need a more sustainable strategy. What could be the features of this sustainable strategy? One is involve the people and the civil society. We heard some of the examples, even from Swati Piramal, as to how citizens in Mumbai and the various philanthropic organizations responded to the emergency of immigrants. We have read in the media, or we have seen in the media, in different parts, citizen groups offered food and transport and medicine and solace and rehabilitation. So citizens have enormous power. But in general, in the fight against corona, public health system has risen remarkably well. Nobody could have believed that Indian government healthcare system would really rise to this occasion. They are usually accused for everything that goes wrong. I must say that they did remarkably well. And we must congratulate and thank them. But how long? Because this strategy is not sustainable. And so we should involve people and civil society like Gram Panchayats. Gram Panchayats have not been given much role. And 600,000 villages cannot be managed by collectors and bureaucrats. So we need to involve Gram Panchayat leaders. We need to involve SHGs. There's a huge network of SHGs in India. It's a fabulous human resource and power. Non-profit organizations need to be involved. Religious and cultural bodies need to be involved. Like China did long ago. I'm not advocating Chinese in any other sense, but as they developed barefoot doctor in those days, we can really develop health guards. We already have ASHA, but ASHA is a sort of a community health worker paid and ordered by the government. But like home guards, we could have an army of health guards from the community. One health guard for each 20 families, nearly 100 population. So India could develop a huge army of health guards, volunteers. If they are trained, if they are activated, they can play a great role in behavior change communication. You very rightly said, Professor Vishwanathan, about the need for cultural change, health culture, and behavior change. So the army of health guards, schools and colleges, look, we boast our demographic dividend. But ironically, we shut down schools and colleges. Now, actually, children are the very low risk population for COVID infection. But in our panic, we shut the schools down. I don't mind that much, but we are not using something like 200 million student power in this country. Imagine, I don't think, except for China, any other country in the world has such a huge young student power. Instead of shutting them in their homes and asking them to learn online, if we would have given them opportunity to learn to face challenges in the life by fighting with Corona, they could have become volunteers. They could have spread the message in health communication. They could have gone and identified sick people, helped them as volunteers. We lost the opportunity. We just shut them down. We should have opened them up. That could have been a great human resource as well as an educational opportunity for them. And our health strategy need to be changed in some aspect. And I don't think so far that our public health strategies have changed, though, as I said in the beginning, that I have enormous admiration for the way public health system responded to this crisis. But then, number one, as I said, we need to broaden the base. Secondly, I would say, how long can we continue with only a vertical program against Corona? In emergency, that was all right. But we need to link with now other health problems and make it more wider. Let me give very quickly what we did in Gadchiroli. ICMR and Health Ministry had anyway advocated and sent the message to all chief secretary, written circular, that alcohol and tobacco consumption, especially chewable tobacco, and then people spit. It might spread Corona, so ban it. So it was banned in Gadchiroli, only on the paper. We turned that into a campaign, Communities Against Corona and Cancer. And so tobacco sell, panthelas as we call it. The panthelas, they were appealed not to sell tobacco, kharra, mawa, gutka. And the municipalities were mobilized and police were mobilized to shut the tobacco sale. And then people were invited and motivated to stop using tobacco. In 300 villages in Gadchiroli, people completely shut down tobacco sale in their villages. So fight against Corona could be converted into fight against Corona and cancer. To protect yourself from Corona, stop tobacco, also protect against cancer. We need probably now to broaden our strategy and message. Finally, we do need to increase our surveillance capacity, our lab capacity, our primary healthcare network, and as everybody says very truly, that we are spending only 1.25% of our GDP on government health program. Last year, it was 67,000 crore rupees. It needs to be straightway doubled. From the UPA government till this government, for the last 15 years, every government has been promising 2 to 3% of GDP to be spent on health and healthcare.
True.
But they are spending it between 1% to 1.25%. From 67,000 crore rupees, it has to be made 125,000 crore rupees.
Yeah, as always, Dr. Bhang, you've been very unique in your answers. And I agree with you, the command and control model in a country like India doesn't work. But getting to Dr. Joshi Shashank, you know, while everybody's mind and share and time space was occupied by COVID-19, you know, many other critical health services were impacted at the time of this public health emergency. What should have been done during this period to ensure that some of the other health services received adequate attention? Because you are really right there, the practicing practitioner in the hospital, and seen this. Any comments on that?
Absolutely. I think what got hit the most were the cancer patients and dialysis people. And I think the government and private sector was mindful of that. So in the city of Mumbai, I must thank BMC and Mr. Kakani is here and his superiors. We had a specialized Mumbai nephrology group looking at a dialysis strategy because they were directly hit. Because, you know, when there is a lockdown and you have dialysis people going, they are the people who are going to die. So we had to save them. Cancer people were directly hit. Acute care, particularly cardiac care, was hit. And it's still hit. It's still getting on this thing. Diabetes. Okay, I'm into diabetes in a big way. It's hugely hit across the country. We are going to look at a tsunami of non-communicable diseases in 2021 and 2022. So we clearly saw that we were hit and a lot of acute care services were badly hit. Fortunately, most of us working as one team without, it was like a borderless team. There was nothing like a private sector or a public sector. Me and Mr. Kakani, I still remember, we used to have a cup of tea, with a meeting with the CMN, and everybody was working at the same platform, and everybody was working as one team. I would beg to differ with Dr. Bang on one area, that India is a rebellious country in general. And if we tell them to do something, we tend to do the opposite. So in the beginning, probably we needed a little bit of danda and coercion. Now we need to be resilient and we need to reform our mindset to be a little more obedient. We are seeing this rebellion all across the world and human minds don't change. We need to inculcate a sense of health responsibility, and that has not inculcated in our people at large. So it's a movement, and that movement has to start from grassroots. Whether it is a Gram Panchayat or whether it's an urban Panchayat, I agree with him that it has to start from home. And I think that's something which is a different ethos altogether. But I totally agree with Ranjit that other healthcare's priorities need to be back in order, whether it was a stroke, whether it was a cardiac emergency, a dialysis, a cancer, or any acute or a life-threatening disease was challenged. But I think the system responded to it well. And now we are seeing that appropriation being done. Yes. And I think, in the overall checklist of diseases, we will have, just like dengue, malaria, we'll have corona. So that's the way we should approach this whole strategy. I still feel that we are past probably 3/4 of corona time, and I wish and pray that we have only a quarter left. Though it's being so unpredictable as a virus, nobody would know. If anybody in this audience, including Dr. Vishwanathan, can give me an answer on that, I would be happy. But I think it's a billion-dollar question. Nobody can answer that. I still feel we are 3/4 down the pandemic, at least in India is concerned. And if we are able to get our vaccine strategy right, and we are able to vaccinate a large population, we already have a large exposure. I think we will be able to rise on it. But I think responsible behavior will have to stay. Masking will have to stay. And masking has reduced a lot of other diseases. So there are advantages. Pollution-related diseases came down. Dengue, malaria came down in the monsoons, and Mr. Kakani will bear with me. We saw some amazing statistics. The hospitals were full in dengue in July of 2019. There was no bed available in Mumbai city in 2019 because of dengue. This July, beds were being challenged for COVID, but hardly any dengue. So you see, there has been advantages also. And dengue is an acute illness. It's mosquito ridden. So I think we need to be more mindful of our environment. COVID taught us to rewire our environment better. At least urban villages which we live in, and I think we live in a concrete jungle, needs much more focus, because I think the urban environments across the world got hit the most. And I think the concretized world needs to be more eco-sensitive. So I think those are the learnings, but non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases definitely now merit more attention. I think we were able to manage them well. Ranjit, I know you're hopefully out of time, so I don't want to continue this, but no, this is a great opportunity for all of us to rise up to the occasion. I think everybody needs to continue this. Yes. There is no time for corona fatigue. There is time for corona positivity and optimism with caution.
Thanks, Shashank. But it's interesting, people normally talk of collateral damage. But as you said in some examples, COVID-19 also gave some collateral advantage of some other diseases being contained. So, Dr. Vishwanathan, one quick example, if you can share, of how a public or private sector may have collaborated for the pandemic in US,
Right. So a couple of, I think, things to learn from this. I want to build on what Dr. Abhay Bang said, right? You can't make these decisions at the national level and expect 1.3 billion people to comply with those recommendations and right. So we have to use, you have to have a national framework, but the solutions have to be regionalized, right? And that's one of the failures in the US. We never had a national framework. In that gap, a number of companies stepped forward. One example is Amazon or Microsoft, and said, okay, we are going to provide our expertise, whether it is creation of an IT infrastructure for vaccination, or using our warehouses as logistics platforms to vaccinate people in their hundreds or thousands. Those are two simple examples. So the idea is that there are platforms, whether it's in Gadchiroli or in Rajasthan or Chandigarh, there are platforms at the regional level that would be used between public, people, and private partners to actually develop those solutions and implement those solutions within this national framework. And that's exactly what is happening. I think because of the gap at the national level, companies are coming forward. I mean, if I take what Swati said, that has already been done in India. Maybe we are following India in the US now, but that's what is required. I think those are good examples of how companies are stepping forward into this gap at the national level.
Thank you. So, I know we are running out of time, but I cannot but attempt to ask one rapid fire question, which the answer has to be either in one word or maximum in one sentence. And this is a common question to all panelists. And the question is, what good has come out of the COVID-19 pandemic? What good has come out of the COVID-19 pandemic? So Swati, first can you, one word or one sentence?
I think a rapid action force together, holding hands together.
Thank you. Dr. Joshi?
Unity in diversity with resilience.
Excellent. Dr. Bang?
Has brought public health at the center of the political and developmental agenda.
Okay. Mr. Kakani?
The behavioral change.
Excellent. Dr. Vishwanath? Vish?
Humility. What we know today, we have been totally wrong compared to what we knew in January.
Absolutely. The frailty and the humility. Absolutely. Thank you so much, panelists. This has been an excellent panel. I know we have many more questions which remain with us, but given the time, I will hand over now to Ananya, Dr. Awasthi.
Thank you so much for the great discussion. And I would just now give it over to Mr. Praveen Rani to deliver the vote of thanks and thank all our speakers and all the people who attended the webinar today.
Good evening. I think it's a big pleasure for everybody to be the part of this discussion. And I'm privileged to perform this pleasant task of proposing the vote of thanks for this webinar. To start with, on behalf of the Bombay Chamber, Howard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, India Research Center, and Project Sanchar, also on my personal behalf, I extend sincere thanks to our panel members, Dr. Swati Piramal, Vice Chairperson of Piramal Group, Mr. Suresh Kakani, Additional Municipal Commissioner, MCGM, Dr. K. Viswanath, Lee Kum Kee Professor of Health Communication, Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Dr. Abhay Bang, Founder and Director, Search, Dr. Shashank Joshi, the member of COVID-19 Task Force of Government of Maharashtra. Special thanks to our session moderator, Mr. Ranjit Shahani, who is a member of the Advisory Council at Howard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, the India Research Center, and also the past president of Bombay Chamber, who has driven the discussion flawlessly. Special thanks to Senior Vice President Ms. Anjali Bansal for addressing the audience on Bombay Chamber's initiative. This webinar could not have been possible without the strong and consistent support from our partners, Howard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, India Research Center, Project Sanchar, and the team. Also would like to mention Dr. Ananya Awasthi, Ms. Pavitra, and their entire team who has been working for this event for last few weeks. Last but not the least, thanking each one of you for taking time from your busy schedule and participating in this important event. Bombay Chamber keep engaging itself in such kind of discussion, which will help Government of India and other stakeholders to devise a citizen-friendly and efficient public health system. We look forward to more engaging sessions in the near future. Thank you very much and good night.